Sprezzatura and the evolution of cool. Renaissance origins, Castiglione's Sprezzatura. Sprezzatura is a term coined by Baldassare Castiglione in his 1528 book The Book of the Courtier, describing an ideal of elegant nonchalance. Castiglione defines Sprezzatura as avoiding all affectation and showing an effortless grace in every action, concealing the effort behind one's accomplishments. In his words, the courtier should conceal all art and make whatever is done or said appear to be without effort. This notion was rooted in the Renaissance aristocratic context. True gentility meant making the difficult look easy, whether in conversation, dancing, or swordplay. Sprezzatura thus embodied the art of studied carelessness, a noble disdain of unworthy effort, that distinguished the ideal courtier. Raphael's portrait of a Renaissance courtier, 1514-15, captures the era's ideal of effortless dignity and poise. Baldassare Castiglione's manual taught that visible effort or labor was vulgar, a sign of lower status, whereas the aristocrat must display graceful ease at all times. This principle arose as feudal knighthood gave way to courtly society. Instead of martial valor, courtiers needed education, wit, and elegance to win favor. Sprezzatura was a social strategy. By dissimulation, in the original Italian, the term carries a hint of disdain. The courtier hides any striving. His composure and self-restraint signal an almost inborn grace, setting him apart from those who have no choice but to toil. In essence, effortlessness became a status symbol. Just as Renaissance paintings were expected to show no trace of hardship, evoking admiration through apparent ease, so the courtier's performances, whether witty repartee or courtly dances, had to appear natural and unforced. Castiglione traced this ideal back to classical sources. He admired how the ancient painter Apelles left work seemingly unfinished to suggest spontaneous genius rather than overlaboring. He cited Cicero's advice that an orator must speak eloquently while appearing completely natural. In Renaissance art, theorists like Giorgio Vasari similarly praised grazia, grace, as the outcome of sprezzatura, the sense that a painting or sculpture had freedom from rules and effortless harmony. Thus, sprezzatura came to define Renaissance aesthetics of relaxed perfection. Castiglione's friend Raphael even painted the author's portrait with moderate confidence and nonchalant expression, conveying that mix of self-assurance and carelessness characteristic of sprezzatura. The concept was inherently elitist and context-dependent. The courtier must adapt to his prince's expectations, displaying no strain or anxiety in meeting them. To forget one's ego and carry oneself with pure and charming simplicity was, paradoxically, the ultimate form of sophistication. Sprezzatura as aristocratic grace. Sprezzatura became synonymous with aristocratic grace. It was more than a passing court fashion, it described a timeless ideal of poised, cool-headed elegance. In Castiglione's Renaissance, this meant concealing ambition and emotions behind a facade of ease. The perfect courtier displayed a certain nonchalance, in all things, masking any artifice. This mask of coolness served a social function, it put others at ease and hid any selfish motives. As Castiglione noted, echoing Aristotle, showing off or trying too hard could threaten others' pride, so it was better to understate oneself. The courtier's calm, unruffled exterior thus protected both his own honor and the prince's ego. Beyond Italy, the ethos of sprezzatura influenced European high society for centuries. We see its echoes in the 19th-century dandyism of figures like Oscar Wilde or Beau Brummel, who cultivated a studied nonchalance in dress and manner. The dandy's wit and imperturbable calm in social situations were very much in the sprezzatura spirit. Wilde quipped that, to do nothing at all is the most difficult thing, highlighting the effort behind effortless appearances. Virtues like the British, stiff upper lip, remaining cool and unflappable under duress, also reflect the lingering ideal of graceful self-control. Virtually every treatise of the classical period linked ease of style to elegance of life, as sociologist Pierre Bourdieu observed. To Bourdieu, aristocratic culture has long prized the aisance that comes from distance from necessity. Those with wealth and breeding can appear casual and calm because they are never desperate. This Detachment from urgency is precisely what Castiglione's Sprezzatura inculcated. It was a kind of performance of authenticity, acting natural and carefree, albeit with great care. Yet, Sprezzatura carried a built-in irony. By affecting to have no affectation, the courtier risked artifice. Castiglione was aware of this paradox. He advised practicing endlessly in private so that one's public performance felt spontaneous. True Sprezzatura would be so well honed that gracefulness seemed a genuine trait, not a trick. Over time, this ideal of effortless superiority took on moral overtones. Honor and virtue were associated with self-mastery, the ability to remain composed, polite, and courageous under pressure. We might recall Ernest Hemingway's definition of courage as grace under pressure, a decidedly Sprezzatura-like notion. By the early 20th century, however, the social landscape had changed, the age of courtiers was over, and new cultural rebels were on the rise. The stage was set for Sprezzatura to evolve into something both related and radically new, the modern idea of cool. From courtier to counterculture, the rise of cool. By the mid-20th century, cool had emerged as a defining ideal of its own, one that in many ways mirrored Sprezzatura, effortless, controlled, graceful, but in other ways flipped its values. It became anti-aristocratic, rebellious, and subcultural. The term cool, in its modern slang sense, arose in African American communities and jazz culture in the 1940s, connoting a person who is calm, detached, and stylishly confident. Cultural historian Robert Ferris Thompson traces this concept to West African aesthetics. In the Yoruba language, etutu, coolness, is associated with composure and balance, even under stress. Thompson notes that across West African and Afro-Caribbean traditions, to be cool means to remain calm and in control, a metaphor of moral aesthetic accomplishment. One Gola proverb he cites defines cool as the ability to be nonchalant at the right moment, to reveal no emotion in situations where excitement and sentimentality are acceptable, in other words, to act as though one's mind were in another world. Equally telling, it is particularly admirable to do difficult tasks with an air of ease and silent disdain. This West African vision of cool sounds remarkably like Sprezzatura, difficult tasks done with effortless ease, masking emotion with silent disdain. In African contexts, coolness also connotes a spiritual power and balance. A cool head is linked to inner strength and even mystic calm. When Africans were brought to the Americas, these values traveled too. Enslaved people in America often hid their defiance behind a cool mask, since open anger would invite punishment. Over generations, what Thompson calls the aesthetic of the cool became a core element of African American culture, evident in everything from blues music to personal style. Sociologists Richard Majors and Janet Mancini-Bilson argue that black men developed a cool pose as a protective demeanor, a poised, unflappable bearing to preserve dignity in an oppressive society. In the jazz clubs of the 1940s, cool became slang for the laid-back, effortlessly hip style of musicians like Lester Young and Miles Davis. Davis's 1949 album Birth of the Cool famously crystallized the term. The jazz, cool cats valued restraint over frenzy, minimalist emotion, maximum control, in direct opposition to the heated intensity of earlier swing music. This sonic attitude of relaxed mastery had clear cultural resonance. Being cool meant appearing in control of oneself when others lost their heads. By the 1950s, cool entered mainstream youth vocabulary, spreading far beyond its Black American origins. It came to define a whole posture of rebellion against establishment norms. Importantly, this mid-century cool inverted the social hierarchy of Sprezzatura. Where Sprezzatura was an aristocrat's tool to signify noble ease, cool was originally the weapon of the underdog. As cultural critics Dick Poughton and David Robbins observe, cool was a stance adopted by outsiders, slaves, prisoners, political dissidents, who could not confront power openly and so met it with ironic detachment. The cool individual hid defiance behind a wall of ironic detachment, distancing himself from the source of authority rather than directly confronting it. In other words, cool was a kind of covert sprezzatura, a way to appear unruffled and in control even when one lacked overt power. This attitude permeated the pop culture of the 1950s and 60s. The existentialist writers and Beat Generation poets celebrated a cool indifference to conventional morality and materialism. Albert Camus' character Massault in The Stranger, 1942, exemplifies this existential cool. He meets the world with flat detachment, neither grief at his mother's funeral nor remorse for an impulsive crime, accepting the absurdity of life with chilling calm. Critics often note Massault's cool detachment and emotional refusal to pretend sentiment he doesn't feel. In America, novelists like Jack Kerouac and poets like Allen Ginsberg idolized the hip outsider who drops out of bourgeois society. Cool became the byword for a new kind of hero, anti-heroic, emotionally restrained, but intensely individual. In Hollywood and international cinema, the film noir archetype of the 1940s prefigured cool. Characters like Humphrey Bogart's Rick Blaine in Casablanca, 1942, or Sam Spade in The Maltese Falcon, 1941, are world-weary, witty, and cynical, never losing their suave composure even under gunfire. They smoke cigarettes in the face of danger, quip under stress, grace under pressure in action. By the mid-50s, actors like Marlon Brando and James Dean brought a new kind of cool, youthful, rebellious energy wrapped in seeming apathy. In The Wild One, 1953, Brando's biker gang leader famously responds to, "What are you rebelling against?" with a lazy, "What do you got?" epitomizing the cool disdain for authority. James Dean's Rebel Without a Cause, 1955, gave cinema the moody teen who slouches against the world, too cool to care, yet seething with unspoken angst. Meanwhile, the language of cool became ubiquitous. Life magazine in 1948 described cool as the trait of urbane jazz musicians, and by the 60s even advertisers were using cool to sell products to the hip generation. The attitude had gone mainstream, as Pountain and Robbins note. By the late 20th century cool was the dominant attitude, adopted equally in tenement basements and millionaire penthouses. Ironically, the elite eventually co-opted cool as just another aristocratic weapon, the latest in a long line of ways to put down social inferiors. What began as a counterculture stance became a universal style, so pervasive that being uncool was now the great sin. Yet, the essence remained. To be cool was to project self-possession, ironic detachment, and refusal to show embarrassment. Trying too hard was uncool, effort had to be hidden, just as Castiglione advised centuries earlier. Indeed, commentators explicitly liken cool to Sprezzatura. The cool, like Sprezzatura, is a kind of studied indifference, an aristocratic quality that is antithetical to cuteness, one observer notes. In short, cool preserved the principle of Sprezzatura, studied effortlessness, but married it to a new spirit of rebellion and outsider credibility. Philosophical and sociological perspectives on cool. Scholars have explored cool both as aesthetic philosophy and as sociological phenomenon, drawing intriguing connections back to Sprezzatura. Robert Ferris Thompson's work, for instance, demonstrates that West African ideals of coolness enriched the concept in the Americas. He emphasizes that in both African and European traditions, coolness implies self-control under fire. English words like cool, composed, nonchalant, imperturbable all convey calm in times of stress. Likewise, a Yoruba elder explained that true coolness is doing what is difficult with ease and maintaining a surly, detached demeanor even in dance. Thompson calls this an aesthetic of the cool, a consciously cultivated, artistic attitude interweaving seriousness and play. He even notes that both Africa and Europe share the notion of sang-froid, literally, cold-blooded, calm, as an ideal of imperturbability. This suggests a deep parallel between Castiglione's aristocratic calm and the cool celebrated in many cultures. In both, emotional restraint and grace are seen as marks of inner superiority. Dick Pountain and David Robbins, in their study Cool Rules, Anatomy of an Attitude, argue that cool has a coherent ethos definable across history. They identify cool as a transgressive, ironic stance that repeatedly emerges among outsider groups and then gets absorbed by the mainstream. They point out the paradox of cool in modern society. Everyone celebrates coolness, yet true cool requires exclusivity. Cool can ultimately define itself only by excluding what is uncool, they note, highlighting the ironic judgment at play. Houghton and Robbins also note how analyzing or consciously pursuing cool is self-defeating, much as Sprezzatura dictates that the moment you try too hard, you fail. You can't be cool by desiring to be cool, as one modern philosopher succinctly put it. Cool, like Sprezzatura, must appear innate. French sociologist Pierre Bourdieu would interpret coolness through his theories of habitus and cultural capital. Although Bourdieu did not explicitly study cool, he observed that dominant classes often legitimize their status by styling their behavior as naturally superior, masking the training behind it. The aristocratic habitus is to act with ease, playfulness, and distance from crude necessity, precisely the performance of ease that Sprezzatura demands. Cool, in a modern sense, can be seen as a form of subcultural capital, as later theorists have called it knowledge of what's hip, a style that confers status within a peer group. We might say the hipster or iconic cool kid of today wields taste and ironic detachment in the same way a courtier wielded Sprezzatura, to signal belonging to an elite, even if that elite is a bohemian or artistic circle rather than a royal court. As Bourdieu might note, calling something cool is a way of distinction, a claim to refined taste that others don't get. In effect, Sprezzatura's logic of distinction through ease lives on in cool's logic of distinction through hip detachment. Philosopher Tom Cochrane offers a compelling aesthetic theory that directly links Sprezzatura and cool. He argues that cool is fundamentally an aristocratic aesthetic, an ideal of grace derived from noble courts. In the aesthetic value of the world, Cochrane identifies two key ingredients within the cool. First, grace. The cool involves an ideal of grace, as Castiglione pinpoints in his analysis of Sprezzatura, a way that actions fit neatly together. Error or failure is ruled out. Cool people exhibit a kind of effortless rightness in how they move and act. They don't stumble, they aren't awkward. They might have tousled hair or a scuffed jacket, but only to the extent that it looks intentional or doesn't diminish their charm. Second, sublimity or power. The cool contains elements of aesthetic power or sublimity, specifically an elevation above the passions and indifference to danger. Here is the rebel aspect. The cool individual is unflappable and fearless, emotionally unattached to outcomes. They have an indifference to danger and a heightened self-confidence that gives them a magnetic aura. This two-part definition, grace plus swagger, we might say, neatly shows how Sprezzatura evolved. The Renaissance courtier had the grace part down, never erring, never looking flustered. The modern cool figure adds the indifference to risk that we associate with rebels, outlaws, and adventurers. A 16th century courtier aimed to never show fear before his prince. A 20th century cool cat aims to never show fear before anything, be it social ridicule, physical peril, or even death. Literary archetypes of Sprezzatura and cool. Literature through the ages gives us vivid embodiments of Sprezzatura and its later incarnation, cool. Lord Byron, the Romantic poet, crafted and personified one early archetype, the Byronic hero. This character type, seen in Byron's Childe Harold, Manfred, and in the poet's own flamboyant life, is proud, cynical, and seemingly impervious to ordinary anxieties. Historian Lord Macaulay described Byron's typical hero as a man proud, moody, cynical, with defiance on his brow and misery in his heart, a scorner of his kind. That mix of defiant aloofness and hidden suffering made the Byronic hero cool avant la lettre. He was usually an aristocrat or outcast roaming far lands, consumed by ennui, haunted by past sins, yet magnetically attractive in his independence. Byron's own image, posing in Albanian costume, nonchalantly described as mad, bad and dangerous to know, by one lover, established cool as rebel. Glamour as early as 1800s. Here, Sprezzatura's aristocratic ease melded with romantic Rebellion. Byron's heroes show effortless mastery, whether with a sword or a sarcastic quip, and refusal to bow to convention. They maintain a pose of blasé indifference even as they feel existential angst. In them, we see the rebel cool template that would recur through modern fiction. In the late 19th century, Oscar Wilde offered another riff on Sprezzatura through the figure of the dandy. Wilde's characters, and Wilde himself in society, cultivated artful frivolity, rapier wit, and an air of imperturbable elegance. In Wilde's novel The Picture of Dorian Gray and comedies like The Importance of Being Earnest, the perfect gentleman is one who takes nothing too seriously. He can utter a brilliant epigram in the face of scandal and lounge languidly while others fuss. This is Sprezzatura in decadent form, all effort is hidden beneath a facade of witty boredom. Wilde's epigrams, one should be a work of art, or where a work of art, I never travel without my diary. One should always have something sensational to read on the train, exemplify the dandy's ironic detachment from earnest or banal concerns. The Wildine dandy turned life into a performance, striking poses of nonchalance. Indeed, Wilde once wrote, "The first duty in life is to assume a pose." Yet the pose had to feel natural and charmingly effortless. This mirrors Castiglione's rule that studied ease must mask any study. Wilde's life, with his velvet suits and casual bon mots in the face of adversity, dramatized the triumph and tragedy of living cool. He remained witty and composed even during his trial and downfall, until the mask finally cracked. Wilde shows that affectation can turn into authenticity if worn long enough. A dandy's pose can become his identity, much as a courtier's practiced grace becomes second nature. Moving into the 20th century, F. Scott Fitzgerald's J. Gatsby is a fascinating case of manufactured sprezzatura and the cracks beneath it. In The Great Gatsby, 1925, Gatsby presents himself as the perfect cool gentleman of the jazz age, a war hero turned mysterious millionaire, throwing lavish parties with apparent ease. Gatsby's demeanor at his own soirees is one of graceful reserve, a charismatic smile and few words, never sweating the small stuff. Nick Carraway, the narrator, famously describes Gatsby's rare quality of eternal reassurance in his smile, which faced the whole external world for an instant, and then concentrated on you with an irresistible prejudice in your favor. This smile encapsulates Gatsby's performative persona, charming others effortlessly. It is a series of successful gestures, an image so carefully constructed that it convinces even cynical Nick for a time. But Fitzgerald also deconstructs this cool facade. As SparkNotes observes, Gatsby's smile captures the theatrical quality of Gatsby's character and his charisma, an image that the novel slowly deconstructs. Gatsby's Sprezzatura is all affectation in service of desire, every bit of his effortless glamour is rehearsed to win Daisy's approval. In contrast to a true aristocrat, Gatsby's cool is studied from books, he practiced elocution and etiquette to reinvent himself. The tragedy is that his effortlessness is indeed an effort, and one that cracks under the pressure of reality. When confronting Tom Buchanan or desperately trying to recapture the past, Gatsby's cool begins to falter, he nearly loses his composure on a hot afternoon in the Plaza Hotel showdown. Gatsby illustrates the tension between authentic cool and affectation. His style is impeccable, pink suits, Oxford accent, steady poise, embodying the refinement side of Sprezzatura. But his obsessive longing for Daisy, a hidden intensity, undermines the detachment side of cool. In Gatsby, we see that coolness as pure performance can be brittle, whereas the most lasting cool, say, Nick's own moral composure, comes from genuine self-contentment. Perhaps the purest literary distillation of cool as philosophical stance is found in Albert Camus' The Stranger, 1942. Its protagonist Massault lives in unapologetic emotional detachment. He is an ordinary clerk in French Algiers who reacts to life's big events, his mother's death, a marriage proposal, a murder he commits, with the same flat calm. Massault refuses to feign sentiment or grief, approaching even his impending execution with almost indifferent acceptance. This radical honesty of feeling, or lack of feeling, reads as a kind of existential cool. He won't perform the expected emotions because that would be inauthentic. At his trial, Massault is condemned more for his unemotional demeanor than for his crime. Society is scandalized by his cool absence of remorse. Camus uses this character to explore the absurd hero who has shed all illusions. In philosophical terms, Massault achieves a form of sprezzatura of the soul. He makes it look easy to stare into the void. He has grace under existential pressure. Yet, unlike the courtier's smiling mask, his cool is one of bleak authenticity. He genuinely does not care to lie about his feelings. In Massault, we see the dark side of cool, detachment pushed to the point of alienation. His story raises the question that haunts cool to this day: is cool sincerity or just an act? In Massault, it is severe sincerity, to a fault. In other cool icons, it may be all act. Other literary figures exemplify facets of cool. Hemingway's protagonists, like Jake Barnes in The Sun Also Rises, show a tough stoicism, wounded war veterans who mask pain with laconic wit and grace under fire. Raymond Chandler's detective Philip Marlowe is hard-boiled but honorable, cracking wise in the face of danger, never rattled by the seedy underworld he navigates. His cool is a working-class knight's sprezzatura, unflinching integrity and a snappy comeback for every threat. Ian Fleming's James Bond, though more pulp than literature, is another classic cool figure, a secret agent who can defuse a bomb or seduce an adversary without loosening his tie. Bond is refinement meets violence, impeccably tailored suits, dry martinis, and deadpan quips as bullets fly. He personifies grace under pressure in the modern heroic mode. Not coincidentally, Fleming gave Bond aristocratic roots, Eton education, etc., linking him to the tradition of elite sprezzatura even as Bond operates as a maverick. Across these characters, common threads of cool emerge: detachment, irony, competence without visible strain, and often a personal code of honor or authenticity that they won't compromise, be it artistic integrity, moral principle, or loyalty to a cause. These traits carry over prominently into the world of film, where cool's visual dimension truly comes to the forefront. Cinematic cool, noir, new wave, and beyond. In Jean-Pierre Melville's neo-noir film Le Samouraï, 1967, the hitman Jeff Costello, played by Alain Delon, exemplifies cinematic cool with his impassive demeanor and effortless style. Film has been a primary arena for defining cool as an aesthetic. Classic film noir of the 1940s gave us the template of the hard-boiled cool protagonist, typically a trench-coated detective or criminal who speaks in terse wisecracks and moves with unflappable self-possession. These characters, often played by Humphrey Bogart, Robert Mitchum, and their peers, set the standard for masculine cool, emotionally unreadable, dryly humorous, and always appearing in control even when in peril. The noir look, tilted fedora, cigarette dangling from lip, a confident slouch, became shorthand for sprezzatura updated to the modern city's shadows. In the 1960s, French filmmakers of the Nouvelle Vague, French New Wave, explicitly romanticized American noir cool and infused it with European existentialism. Director Jean-Luc Godard's landmark film Breathless, Bout de Souffle, 1960, is practically a love letter to cool. Its protagonist, Michel, Jean-Paul Belmondo, is a young Parisian hoodlum who models himself after Bogart. Michel wears sunglasses, a fedora, and a perpetual Gauloise cigarette. He talks tough and shrugs off consequences. Godard's jump-cut editing and spontaneous shooting style mirrored the character's own devil-may-care attitude. The form of the film was as cool as its content. The new wave heroes like Michel were different from classical heroes. They were anti-heroes, often immoral, but the films invited us to admire their style and attitude if not their ethics. Cool in these films meant breaking rules with flair. Godard famously said, "All you need for a movie is a girl and a gun," reflecting the stripped-down, ironic approach. It's about attitude over plot. In Breathless, the cool hero ultimately meets a futile end, shot by police, dying with a last move of indifference, cementing the idea of cool as doomed youth, beautiful, short-lived, too cool to grow old. Jean-Pierre Melville, a French contemporary of Godard, took cinematic cool to an aesthetic peak with Le Samouraï. This film opens with a nearly wordless 10-minute sequence, showing Jeff Costello, Alain Delon, lying in a bare apartment, smoking, the epitome of silent, solitary cool. The entire film is an exercise in minimalism and meticulous style, with muted colors and precise movements. It is often cited for its aesthetic of cool. Jeff Costello is a hitman who barely speaks, he wears a perfect trench coat and fedora, and his face betrays no emotion. As a professional, he executes his tasks with surgical detachment. Even when hunted by the police, Jeff remains eerily calm, he evades capture. Through nerve and quick reflexes, but never breaks a sweat. Critic Helen de Cruz notes that Le Samouraï is famous for its aesthetic of cool, presenting an uncompromising focus on one man's ritualistic poise. In an analysis of the film, Tom Cochrane's view is invoked. Cool in this film is achieved by combining apparent effortlessness and grace, Sprezzatura, with an elevated indifference to fear or passion. Indeed, most things and people, no matter how hard they try, are not cool, Cochrane writes, but Jeff Costello is, because he makes no effort that shows. He moves like a ghost through Paris's underworld, emotionally untouchable. This archetype, the icy lone wolf, influenced later cinema from Hollywood thrillers to Hong Kong action films. On the other side of the Atlantic, Hollywood's king of cool was actor Steve McQueen. In the 1960s, McQueen's roles in films like The Great Escape, 1963, Bullet, 1968, and The Thomas Crown Affair, 1968, established a new model of American cool. McQueen's characters are tough but understated, men of few words and decisive actions. In Bullet, for example, McQueen's San Francisco cop famously speaks minimally, but conveys intensity through cool glances and a relentless calm pursuit, including the quintessential cool action scene, a car chase where McQueen's face hardly changes expression as he handles the wheel. His underacting, a focus on nonverbal communication and physical presence over big speeches, gave him a minimalist charisma. Off-screen too, McQueen personified a style, sports cars, motorcycles, effortless fashion, that transcended trends and felt naturally cool. In his case, we see how cool became a consumer ideal, magazines and fans sought to emulate McQueen's effortless style, from his Persol sunglasses to his tweed jackets. He demonstrated that cool wasn't just what you did, it was how you looked doing it. McQueen's cool heroes were not anti-heroes or villains, they were more traditional good guys, but with a 1960s anti-authority streak, they didn't like rules or bosses much, and a laid-back confidence that separated them from the square, anxious characters around them. Moving into the late 20th century, postmodern cinema often self-consciously played with cool. Directors like Quentin Tarantino built entire films around stylized, referential cool, think of Pulp Fiction, 1994, with its hitmen discussing hamburgers and pop songs in casual banter right before a deadly shootout. The juxtaposition of violence and trivial chatter created an ironic cool, the characters are so unfazed by danger that they discuss fast food. Tarantino's work, heavily influenced by the French New Wave and Melville, revels in ironic detachment and genre-savvy style. Characters often act as if aware they're in a movie, maintaining a cool pose even in absurdity. This is cool as a kind of meta-performance. We are invited to appreciate the coolness of style itself, slow-motion walks, witty dialogue, retro music cues, as much as any substance. In a way, it's Sprezzatura turned in on itself. The director shows off cinematic skill while making it seem playful and effortless, just as the characters show off their unflappability. Outside of Hollywood, the late 20th and early 21st centuries saw global takes on cool. Hong Kong director Wong Kar-wai cultivated a particularly moody, romantic cool in films like Chungking Express, 1994, and In the Mood for Love, 2000. Wong's characters are often soft-spoken, sharply dressed urban loners drifting through neon-lit nights. They exude a kind of elegant melancholy, cool not as triumph but as isolation. For example, in Chungking Express, one protagonist is a cop who numbs a heartbreak with compulsive habits and quirky inner monologues, maintaining a facade of jokey calm even as he's hurting. Wong often dresses his leading men in simple, impeccably tailored suits or leather jackets, giving them a timeless stylishness. As one style commentary notes, Wong's films show men, clad in well-crafted tailoring, that, combined with atmospheric music and saturated color, cultivated a distinct coolness for Hong Kong protagonists. In the Mood for Love, Tony Leung's character is the picture of restrained grace, even as he falls in love with his neighbor, he keeps a polite distance, expresses longing only in furtive gestures. The film's lush visual style, slow motion, rich colors, and the characters' controlled performances create an aura of cool romantic restraint. Wong Kar-wai thus merges Sprezzatura's refinement, impeccable dress, polite restraint, with modern cool's emotive detachment. Characters hide their true feelings, appearing composed while lonely. Across these examples, we can observe how cool in film often comes down to a consistent set of traits: detachment, composure under pressure, style, irony, and a kind of personal code. Whether it's a hitman, a detective, a lovelorn writer, or a wandering criminal, the cool character meets the world on his own terms, showing minimal fear or desperation. They often have witty or terse dialogue, never verbose or pleading. Begging is not cool. They react to crises with level-headed resourcefulness, sometimes with humor. Crucially, they don't betray much emotion. Pain is borne stoically or channeled into a single tear with back turned to the camera. In cinematography, cool is conveyed through things like stillness. A cool character might be framed calmly in center while chaos happens around, controlled, precise movements, and of course, costuming and props, sunglasses, cigarettes, a well-cut suit, or a leather jacket, all signals of studied style. To better illustrate the evolution of Sprezzatura into modern cool, the table below summarizes key examples and their attributes. As the table suggests, Sprezzatura and cool are deeply connected by the ideal of effortless excellence, but they diverge in emphasis. Sprezzatura was about refinement, decorum, and social approval. The courtier's goal was to blend in and please, albeit subtly, his noble audience. Cool, especially in its mature form, is often about standing apart and defying. The cool individual may alienate authority or the mainstream as long as he stays true to his own style or code. Sprezzatura's nonchalance aimed to avoid offending the sensibilities of others. Cool's nonchalance often serves to signal that one couldn't care less about others' sensibilities. Think of the rock star trashing a guitar, or the beat poet thumbing his nose at phonies. Yet, the through line from one to the other is evident. Both Sprezzatura and cool celebrate composure, self-control, and a kind of charisma that comes from not appearing needy or desperate. In both cases, there is a premium on irony. The courtier uses playful wit to charm, the cool modern uses sarcastic humor or ironic distance to show he's not fooled by the world. Both can involve a degree of deception or at least performance. The courtier performs ease to hide effort, and the modern hipster might perform apathy to hide how much he actually cares about seeming cool. This raises a final crucial tension. Sprezzatura versus cool, continuities and differences. Despite their kinship, Sprezzatura and contemporary cool differ in key ways. One major difference is authenticity versus affectation. Castiglione's Sprezzatura, by definition, is a studied pose, an affectation of non-affectation. It requires faking effortlessness. Modern cool, in its ideal form, prizes authenticity. The coolest person is supposed to be just being themselves, naturally chill. In practice, of course, cool can be as contrived as any courtier's routine. Teenagers and celebrities certainly practice looking cool. But culturally, we often dismiss those who try too hard as posers. The ultimate cool is to appear as if you're not trying to impress anyone, which interestingly is exactly what Castiglione also prescribed. The difference is in intent. Sprezzatura was a social tactic aimed upward, pleasing a prince by concealing effort, whereas cool is often a social tactic aimed outward, impressing peers by concealing caring. Cool people act as if they don't need validation. Indeed, being too eager to please is uncool. The courtier, conversely, very much needed his lord's validation, he just couldn't show that need overtly. Another difference lies in rebellion versus refinement. Sprezzatura was about polish and harmony within accepted norms. The courtier's role was to embody his culture's highest standards, linguistic elegance, graceful dancing, tasteful dressing, without visible strain. Contemporary cool, especially post-1950s, often involves a stance of rebellion or non-conformity. The cool individual might flaunt breaking the rules, whether it's social rules, a la the rebellious teen, or artistic rules, an avant-garde filmmaker. In jazz, coolness sometimes meant flouting musical conventions with relaxed improvisation. In style, cool might mean wearing clothes that reject formal elegance, ripped jeans, leather jackets, yet create a new aesthetic of their own. However, even this difference isn't absolute. Today's high fashion and elite circles often appropriate street cool and refine it, while some subcultures, punk, etc., intentionally avoid looking refined to assert authenticity. The cycle continues. What is rebellious cool one day, long hair on men in the 60s, for example, becomes gentrified the next. Meanwhile, the core notion of grace under pressure endures. Whether an aristocrat or an anti-establishment icon, to be admired they must not crack under strain. An interesting point of continuity is the idea of playing it cool in social interactions, which is not far from Castiglione's advice to avoid affectation. Both imply a kind of emotional restraint: don't come on too strong, don't show desperation or panic. We see this in romantic contexts: be cool, don't seem too eager, just as much as in professional ones, stay cool under criticism. The difference is Castiglione thought in terms of honor and dignity, whereas today we might frame it as confidence and self-respect. In both cases, overeagerness is low status. It's notable that even on social media, a space where people overtly chase likes and attention, a counter-movement values effortless cool. Some influencers cultivate a carefully casual persona, as if their glamorous photos took no effort. The hashtag woke up like this speaks to this performance of naturalness. We also see a revival of interest in sprezzatura in lifestyle and fashion circles, often literally using the term to describe men's style quirks, like a nonchalantly askew tie or an unbuttoned collar that just so happens to look great. The Italian industrialist Gianni Agnelli was famous for wearing his watch over his shirt cuff, a deliberate touch to seem carelessly stylish, often cited as modern sprezzatura. In fact, in the age of Instagram and constant self-curation, some thinkers suggest sprezzatura has newfound relevance as a rebellion against overexposure. Writer Ilaria Gaspari argues that in a world of incessant self-promotion, hiding one's qualities instead of displaying them can be liberating. This echoes the cool ethos: don't advertise yourself, let your cool speak quietly. Gaspari sees a revival of the ancient art of sprezzatura as a cure for social media anxiety, a way to reclaim oneself by not needing external applause. In the same vein, poet James Arthur in his poem Sprezzatura, 2012, writes of effortlessness arriving when one puts aside stubborn ego and opinion, such that it alights with the padding footfall of a child ballerina. In other words, true grace comes when you stop trying so hard. The paradox remains: achieving that state often requires great effort and self-cultivation. In summary, sprezzatura and modern cool both champion a cultivated effortlessness, a charismatic calm in the face of life's challenges. The journey from Castiglione's courtier to the 21st century cool kid is a tale of shifting contexts, from courtly obedience to individualist rebellion, from refined gentility to streetwise authenticity. Yet the ideal person in both visions would share a recognizable attitude: they would meet the world with a confident half-smile or steady gaze, never flustered, always a step ahead in the game of appearances. Whether wearing a doublet and hose or a leather jacket and shades, the one who masters the art of appearing supremely at ease holds a certain power over the imagination of others. In the end, Sprezzatura and cool converge on the notion of freedom, freedom from compulsion, from fear, from the need to impress. The Renaissance courtier with Sprezzatura was free from the vulgar necessity of laboring his image, his grace seemed to flow naturally. The coolest characters of modern times are free from the need to conform or care, they seem to float above petty concerns. Both inspire admiration and a little envy. As we navigate our own era, with its social pressures and performative platforms, the appeal of Sprezzatura/cool remains strong. We still yearn for that poise and inner security that lets a person glide through the world as if untouched by its heaviness. And perhaps that is the ultimate continuity. Coolness, like Sprezzatura, promises a kind of invulnerability. It says the slings and arrows cannot hurt me, I am beyond them, I am cool. Achieving that state, or cleverly appearing to, is an art that has evolved, but not fundamentally changed, from Castiglione's Renaissance dialogues to the films and fiction of our postmodern age. It's an art forever in tension between being and seeming, sincerity and pose, but when we witness it done to perfection, we cannot help but be captivated by its effortless charm.